It gives me great pleasure for the 4th year in a row to introduce our chair, Maribel Lopez from Lopez Research.
Hello, everybody. Oh, excellent. Everybody's awake. Wonderful. So, here we are in Phoenix. And on my way to Phoenix, or thinking about coming to Phoenix since I've known about this for some time, I was thinking that life is a journey. And I reflected on my own personal journey with the nGage folks and with mobile, and realized that things have changed considerably since I first started with these folks and with you. When I first started, we talked a lot about devices. We were evangelizing the concept of mobile. And now, I've moved out to the West Coast and I talk to a lot of technology companies. And coming here and living in the West Coast and thinking about my life and thinking about it as a journey, it reminded me of the concept of pioneers and how difficult it was for the pioneers. And I want to talk to you today about pioneering a new cognitive era. We're going to talk about a lot of things, but this is part of it. So when I was thinking of this concept of the pioneers, what do you guys think of when you think of pioneers? What is a characteristic of a pioneer? Yell out something. Brave. Brave. Rugged. Rugged. Groundbreaking. Unknown. Fearless. Crazy. There's a little bit of crazy in every fearless. Desperate. Okay. So all of these things could be used to describe our journey, our technology journey. We are pioneers. And what I thought was so different about standing on this stage today versus standing on this stage last year, and I probably should take this badge off, about standing on this stage last year is that last year when I was talking about this concept of mobile, I talked about convergence, and I talked about how we weren't in an isolated island. We were pulling together pieces of cloud computing, of analytics, of mobile, of big data and processing. So each of your organizations has started this. So this year, I don't have to stand here and tell you that any of that is important. Is there anyone in the room that does not have one of these projects underway or a thought of strategy around one of these projects? No hands. I take that to mean that we were all pioneers, that we have taken the journey, that we are moving, that we are risking certain comforts to bravely go into new market models, new technology models, so that we can grow our organizations, not just in terms of top line, but also in terms of margin, not just in terms of customers, but in terms of new markets. We're building better companies than we ever could have thought of before those 4 technologies that we saw on the last slide. We are pioneers, and we are moving beyond digital transformation. I originally thought that this was going to be a digital transformation speech. And I sat there and I thought, well, haven't we been doing digital transformation for a while now? I think we have. So it now comes time to move beyond digital transformation. And that beyond transformation, in my opinion, is moving, moving from what was a PC era into what's now the mobile cloud era, which is where we all are right now, right? We're in the mobile cloud era. And now we're looking towards the next generation, which I think we will be talking about over perhaps the next 2 to 5 years, this transition to what I call cognitive and composable. Now, I think we might debate offline if composable is the right word, but they both have C's, and they are both, which is a really important thing for an industry analyst to create marketectures where you start everything with the same first letter. If there's everything I've learned in my organization, it was that. So I want to talk about 3 things today. My goal as the keynote is not to give you the answers, it's to leave you with a few thought-provoking questions. It's to leave you with questions that you want to spend the next 2 days talking about in one-on-ones, listening to in the agenda program, and hopefully enjoying some cocktails or beverages of your choice and talking about them there. So I want to talk about what's changing in our existing mobile cloud era. I want to talk a little bit about what's new, and then I want to provide a few pieces of guidelines or advice that I've really gleaned from just talking to people about what they're doing and how they're progressing in this new journey. Because I do feel like we have been on a massive technology change. It hasn't stopped, and we're actually entering into a new era of technology change. So, 4 years ago, we were talking about how big mobile was going to be, how great and amazing. Well, it's here. It's pervasive. It's everywhere. We've got multiple device types. We have them as handhelds. We have them as wearables. We have them as wearables in our personal life. We have them as wearables in our business life. Billions of devices. We also have the, call it IoT, call it wearables, call it mobile devices. It's here. It's pervasive. And as a result of that, it's had some profound impacts on our technology environments. We now have multiple operating systems we're dealing with. We are now talking about different style platforms in terms of creating platforms for IoT, platforms for virtual reality and augmented reality. We've got new navigation and input modes. And we've got new data that come in as a result of having sensors such as location, humidity, temperature, motion. We also have cloud, and I'm calling it Cloud 4.0. I remember when I was writing the Right Time Experiences book, I tried to go back and figure out when cloud happened. It happened a long time ago, actually. But the iteration of cloud that I'm referring to basically started in, maybe the 06 timeframe, let's call it, right? So we've been on this journey for a while now. We've moved from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service. We have SaaS. We continue to get new variants of platform as a service. The one I'm hearing a lot about right now is in and around the IoT space, but we're also starting to hear about it in machine learning space. So we've got new cloud. And as a result of new cloud, that's actually helping our mobile journey tremendously. We now have dev test in the cloud. We now have platform as a service such as MBAS and DevTools, SaaS, data as a service, and cognitive as a service is happening. There are big changes in data. Whether it's big data, small data, however you want to define it, here's what I see happening in organizations. I call this my data wheel. Basically, we're connecting our data, we're adding new data, we're looking at data as a service, or we're selling new business models as data as a service, right? So we had these silos. So what's changing is we've moved from silos to starting to connect our data. And some of those could be in what we call lakes or ponds, but we're moving our data into new places to make it actionable. I remember talking to an automobile association, and they were talking a lot about how they changed their customer service experience by pulling all their data together so that they could now actually service somebody when they called in instead of doing that fumble of 2, 3, 5 minutes waiting for data. We have new data sources that we're building into our applications. This is a profound change in the sense that we now have the opportunity to build processes with better data we didn't have before. So as we think of our applications and services, I actually don't even think of an application as mobile or not mobile now. I think of an application as portable across multiple devices. And as a result of that, we have to think of adding new data and changing the processes. And part of that is what is now known as the IoT data stack. Right? We're talking about data as a service. You can buy weather.com data, you can have Twitter sentiment analysis data, pricing databases. There's a wide range of data that you can look at to augment, and that's the buy that was in my wheel. But I'm also starting to talk to people about how can they unlock the power of their own data and create new business models around that. So for example, service providers are looking at providing aggregate data so that they can give people insights into how people flow through different geographies and through stores. We've talked about traffic data, obviously, as another example. We've got cameras and all the IoT things that we could light up that would give us more data. So there is an opportunity for every business in here to think about what their data as a services strategy is, because you can have your own data as a service strategy. And all of this, in my mind, is creating a huge application and process change. We have to re-architect our applications for new data sources. We have to re-architect our applications so that they move seamlessly across multiple screen sizes, be them small screen sizes, be them large screen sizes like that, with different input mechanisms. Maybe we talk to it. Maybe we type into it. So fundamental changes abound. Our applications are moving from what was a monolithic architecture into microservices style architecture, or composable in this case is what I called it. We've been talking about agile development for a while, and agile development and microservices and now continuous delivery. So we are now constantly evolving our applications, our services. Things are never done. Products are never finished. Applications are never done. It's a new world. Analytics is also different. We're moving from dashboards to insight. We're actually starting to expose some of the data to people within the organization so that they can figure out what they need to know. And they're not static tools anymore. They're much more real time. They also take into account more data. So we're starting to see changes there. So some of what's new. Well, we could argue whether or not IoT is new. I know this. I actually was around when the M2M thing happened, and we just talked about connecting. Now we're actually talking about doing new things with IoT, right? And so what are some of the new things we're doing? We're having connected manufacturing. We're having things like the Coke Freestyle machine that you can have it however you want to have it. We're having things like Disney Magic Band and understanding where you are in the park and delivering better experiences as a result of that. So all of these things are sort of pioneering IoT-style use cases. There are many of them. Many people talk about predictive maintenance in the industrial IoT side. I think we will see a myriad of new applications. So I'm encouraging everybody to look at what types of equipment could you actually connect and gather data from? Or are you going to be working with partners that have that can somehow provide you insight in terms of supply chain tracking, in terms of health of your assets and goods as they get delivered to you? So there is an IoT use case for almost everybody in this room. In addition, we're starting to see augmented reality. So this is an example of augmented reality in training. I have to say, last year I wasn't a huge fan of augmented reality or virtual reality. I have to say this year I'm starting to see lots of interesting, creative, useful business models that could happen around it. I still think it's early, but we're talking about what's new. And so think about what that might look like. I know one of my MRC clients, I think might be in the room, AmerisourceBergen was talking about how they could do augmented reality or virtual reality in their trade show booths to show people an experience. AR for repairing equipment, another great business use case. Construction, actually being able to overlay and see where things are supposed to go in the building design so that you get it right the first time. Lowe's actually showed a pretty compelling demo of what it could be like to build a kitchen, see what the cabinets and the countertops look like. These are expensive decisions. If you can actually get somebody to purchasing earlier and purchasing through you, that's a big change in customer experience and in sales. Safety. I've now seen safety helmets that would allow people that are out in the field to know that equipment's too hot, or sensors that gauge there's gases in here that you shouldn't be near. So safety is actually a big issue in a lot of industries that we've been talking to. And productivity, actually helping people do their jobs better by giving them more information in a way that's easy to consume. The next thing I think is new outside of IoT and this VR/AR momentum is the concept of cognitive services, which also isn't new. I think we could go back at least until the 60s where we started talking about this. But there has been tremendous innovation happening in cognitive services, which can also be discussed as machine learning. Some of it could be considered artificial intelligence. So what we're doing now is we're building systems where we can put in massive amounts of data that could be ours, that could be from partners, that could be from data sources that we purchase. And we're basically munging that information, creating contextual services, learning services, predictive services. And as a result of that, We can automate some what I would call routine processes. Doesn't have to go all the way to something really crazy. Just things like expense reports or AR invoice matching. Maybe eventually you get to things that are saying, okay, due to vibration and temperature and humidity, I might want to slow this piece of equipment down but not shut it down. I'll have somebody go check and look at it. And that gets into the concept of augmenting intelligence. This is one of the things I talk a lot about in things like cancer treatment is a big cognitive service that we all read about, right? Whenever you read about that, does it ever say that it takes over the doctor? No, there's always a doctor in the process. They just have more information. So this to me is what I think is really valuable in the cognitive services angle, is that we're now starting to get to a point of big data, analytics, new services models to do this. So none of these are meant as an endorsement, but I just wanted to give you some color for what's going on. So if you look at IBM, they have bunches of APIs that are anything from sentiment to image recognition. We heard a lot about IBM, but then Microsoft also has a set of cognitive services that you can look into. HPE announced Haven on Demand for their set of cognitive services that you can look through. So what I'm saying here before, as we move into the advice section is that if you are looking to see what's happening in cognitive and you think it's not already happening, it is. There are services in the cloud you can purchase, you can tinker with today. They're from major vendors. They're from more than one vendor, so it actually is a market. And every day I'm hearing more and more about it. I was just at SAP Sapphire last week, and they talked about their cognitive services and their machine learning. So this is a trend. This is a big, huge trend that you guys have to be on top of. So part of my advice actually has nothing to do with what I last just talked about, but has a lot to do with the fact that one of the things to make all this happen is that you have to manage your security threats. It wasn't on any of the other slides, but part of my biggest piece of advice is we've got to manage the three major vectors of security threats, which is device, network, and app. I think we frequently move into this domain with the silver bullet mentality, but we're really still in a layered security model. Those layers are changing. One of the things that I think has been very interesting is the concept of moving more towards basic threat detection in addition to prevention. So knowing if you've been breached and trying to figure out what your next best action should be as a result of that. I see that we have an evolution of security. We've talked a lot about devices and networks. I know all of the previous events have been very EMM, MDM-centric events for mobile. We've talked a lot about securing the device. We then started talking about securing mobile apps and mobile content. Now we're talking about the concept of building self-defending apps. We're talking more about identity and context. Is this Maribel? Is it one of her devices? Is she in the right location? Is she accessing the right data? So we've basically elevated into being a more unified security model in terms of how we think about it, but we still need different layers to make that happen. And to me, security really starts with the code. You have to build your best code, which I know you all know, but I also know that we're all busy and people put time constraints on you, so you don't test enough. But I think there's an opportunity to start the code layer and then move to hardening apps and self-defending apps. On the data side, we've talked a lot about data. Data has gotten much cheaper to store, which I think we all know. As a result of that, I see a lot of the companies I'm dealing with are saying, we try to keep as much data as possible, someplace fairly raw, making sure that, the only thing that's happened to it is that we throw out anything that we think is not good data, right? But in general, keeping the data so that they can then analyze it later. The other big change I've seen happen in data is that people were talking a lot about putting everything into the cloud and processing it there. Now there's more of a discussion of what needs to be processed on the edge versus what needs to be processed in the core, and then how real-time that needs to be. So the sophistication of the data strategies, I think, are migrating quite rapidly. And then when I think of apps, and when I think of the notion that we're considering basically decomposing apps, making them services, making them assemblies, when I think of that, I start to think, well, then we can create a right time experience, which I consider to be the right info to the right person at the right time on their device of choice. which is, I think, one of the app changes that we've been moving towards. So less about apps, more about workflows, processes, getting people to the right information. So some of the things that we see and have been talking about are still missing. I think that if we look at the migration of technology, I remember when we had ASPs and web hosting, which I believe became cloud and SaaS. I remember when we had SOA, which I now believe is what we call microservices. I remember when we had APIs, and now I think we need better APIs because we now have considerations that we have to do with mobile. We now are talking about doing machine learning. I think that if we think about microservices, maybe there's an orchestration layer there that needs to happen, because if everything is composable and we've got multiple services, it could be fragile when you're building applications. If you change one thing, another thing could break. So something has to go on there that allows that management and process to be better. And then I think on cognitive is great, machine learning is great, but there's still a lot of human that has to be in machine learning, as I call it. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you have to go back and see what's being learned and if it's the right thing and if that's how you want your next action to behave as a result of that learning. And then in addition to that, I think we can streamline the cognitive process by making it more industry specific. Things that would be good for healthcare, things that would be good for retail, so that when you're buying packs, you get sort of a semi-customizable pack, so to speak. So those are some of the things that I hope we'll be working on over the next 2-3 years. And the other thing I think is missing is pioneers. You know, there are very few of us that have moved into the brave new world because we're still dealing with the existing mobile cloud era. But while you're dealing with the existing mobile cloud era, I implore you, please think of the things that are next and try to put those as part of your plan. It'll just make it so much easier as you go down over the next 1 or 2 years. So these are some of the things to think about. As you can see from my tone, I'm really trying to take us to a place that is bigger than just thinking about mobile or just thinking about cloud or just thinking about analytics, but thinking about how we transform our businesses using all the technology and breaking down those silos so that we can actually get to the next generation of business faster, cheaper, better.